Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 2 of the Chain the Evolution of Fleetwood Mac podcast series. I'm Sean Stewart alongside Jeff Coast.
Hey, everybody.
And on today's episode, we'll talk about the Bob Welch era of Fleetwood Mac, or as it has often been referred to as the Forgotten Era, and we'll get into this why just a little bit later on in the podcast. And on the previous episode, we talked about how both Peter Green and Jeremy Spencer departed from the band, and after Spencer left in 1971, the band was really faced with the difficult task of replacing him, and easier said than done.
Exactly right. It was a very hard task, because this band was so close-knit from the beginnings in 1967, and now they lost Peter Green, who was their leader, and then Jeremy Spencer took his place, and then we lost Jeremy Spencer. So right after the tour that Spencer was supposed to have been on ended, the band had to retreat back to their kiln house to hold auditions to replace Jeremy Spencer. They had some auditions, but they had no luck. They couldn't find anybody that they wanted to be in the band, and their assistant secretary, Judy Wong, actually suggested a friend of hers named Bob Welch, who she went to high school with back in California. And Bob Welch at the time was living in Paris, having his own personal struggle in the music business. He had been involved in a couple bands, but nothing of any success, and so he was living in Paris kind of looking for his next big break. Fleetwood Mac contacted him, and he met them at the Kiln House, and after just having a very short conversation with just talking to the Mick Fleetwood and the McVies, he was signed on to the band without even as much as an audition, which is really awesome and quite surprising. Bob Welch would take up the rhythm guitar position, and he would sing backing vocals for Danny Kirwin, who was actually the new band's current leader at the time. Although that role would switch down the road as Bob Welch's time with Fleetwood Mac would progress. Part of the reason why the band picked Bob Welch was the fact that he was an American, and he was, in fact, the first American to be in this band. And they had thought, well, if we get an American guitar player, singer in this band, that might help our appeal to American audiences. Which at the time, Fleetwood Mac was not that well known in the United States. The first album that he made with Fleetwood Mac was an album called Future Games, which is a song that Bob Welch also wrote and sang on the album. The tone of the album was the biggest stylistic change that they had up to that point. Bob Welch was not really a blues guitarist. He was more of a jazz-influenced, and there's a bit of a folk rock side to the group as well. And this was definitely a new era for Fleetwood Mac. The next album that followed up Future Games in 1972 was called Bare Trees, which is considered to be one of their most popular albums from the Bob Welch era. And this album featured his best-known song called Sentimental Lady. And we're going to play you that song, along with the title track, Bare Trees, which is a really nice bluesy rock sound song. I love that song a lot. And we'll kind of discuss these songs and compare them to the Peter Green era and just kind of talk about a little bit where these songs put Fleetwood Mac in this new Bob Welch era.
That was some great stuff from both Bob Welch and Danny Kirwin. And Sentimental Lady, kind of one of the first, I guess you could say, love or rock love songs for this group. And Bare Trees, it's just heavy blues, heavy rock and roll. Gotta love that rock guitar.
Oh yeah, I like it a lot. It's a heavy emphasis on rhythm on Bare Trees. It's a really good song for Danny Kirwin. If you want to compare Bob Welch and Danny Kirwin, they're a little bit different. Christy McVie, when she joined the band, she did have a singer-songwriter style to her lyrics on her songs, and Bob Welch just kind of continued this. In fact, if you notice on Sentimental Lady, there's a heavy emphasis on acoustic guitars. This was something that was not totally new, original to the band. Although OL with Peter Green originally did have an acoustic guitar playing the intro riff, but they were more of an electric-driven band. And with Bob Welch, now we have a lot more acoustic guitars in here, a little bit more, and a bit of a different style. Whereas the band's kind of drifting away from the blues music, and now we're kind of going into the singer-songwriter style that was in this era in the early 70s. Sentimental Lady was, again, one of their most popular songs in this era. When Bob Welch left the band in 1974, he actually re-recorded that song in 1976, and it actually became a big hit for him on his album French Kiss. And a little side note here, when he re-recorded Sentimental Lady in 1976, which is by far the one you'll hear on most oldies radio stations, by the way, that song arrangement for Sentimental Lady is very different. Lindsey Buckingham, who joined Fleetwood Mac after Bob Welch left, helped him produce that album, and particularly that song. In fact, on the 1976 version, Lindsey Buckingham is playing all the guitars, including the acoustics and the electric lead. And he also provides backing vocals along with Christine McVie. And this version we play for you is the original 4-minute version. And the version that he released in 1976 only had one verse. The second verse was completely removed, and the guitar solo was different and was a little bit shorter, and the song faded out quicker. They're both really good. I do like the 1976 version just a little bit because Lindsey Buckingham is involved, and he's a really great arranger, and we'll get to that in the next podcast about Lindsey Buckingham's arrangemental genius that he is. And but really, Sentimental Lady is just a really nice Bob Welch song. He's a very talented guitar player. And Bare Trees, classic, Danny Kirwin, still reminiscent of the old days of Fleetwood Mac. And I just love that rock and grooving sound. I say groovin', I'm sorry, but I can't think of a better word to say for that song. It's just a really good track. Awesome music.
Sometimes you really don't need to have words for it. You kind of just have to let the music speak for itself.
Oh, yeah.
And at least for that specific song, groovin's probably a good word to use.
It is, yeah. I mean, everything in Bare Trees, right from the bass line to the rhythm electric and to the lead line, I mean, it's got a nice sweet hook to it. I have to admit, it's a really great song. I love playing that song.
Well, that's definitely some good stuff, Jeff. And we had mentioned in the previous podcast that there was an explosive exit from the band, and unfortunately, Bob Welch's time with Fleetwood Mac didn't always go smoothly, and, well, he got along with both Mick Fleetwood and the McVies. Danny Kirwin proved to be a bit of a troublemaker. He relied heavily on his alcohol dependency and definitely abused the substance, and it definitely led to some problems with the band.
Exactly right. Bob Welch and Danny Kirwin did not really get on with each other from the very beginning. They often argued on a personal and professional level, but more so on the professional level. Bob Welch has said about Danny Kirwin is the fact he could never really have a conversation with Danny. Danny Kirwin was this really overtly serious and intense individual, and he could never take a break between music and just personal conversation. He just could not do it. He was all serious all the time, and he couldn't relax. And Bob Welch tried to be friendly with him. It didn't work. And it's a shame, but this dispute between the two came to a head in 1972 when they were touring the United States, and while they were tuning before a show, an argument blew up over tuning, and Danny Kirwin stormed off the stage, went into his dressing room, grabbed his Les Paul Custom, which is a really beautiful black guitar he'd had since his beginning days of Fleetwood Mac. He picked it up and smashed it against the dressing room wall, and then turned around and smashed his own head against the wall and told the band that, "I'm not playing with you guys. You're on your own without me." He turned around, went down into the audience aisleways, and sat in the sound booth and watched the band perform without him. And, without their lead guitar player, they struggled badly. Bob Welch had to now do both rhythm and lead, and basically Danny Kirwin just wanted to see him fail. And the concert, as clearly as could be, was a disaster. It was horrible. It went badly. And to make matters worse, after it ended, Danny Kirwin came to the band and criticized them for how badly they did. And John McVie was quoted to have said, "Well, I about turned around and choked the life out of him." And then Bob Welch said to Mick Fleetwood, "He's got to go. You got to get Danny out here." And Mick Fleetwood agreed. And Danny Kirwin exited the band, and he has not spoken or had anything to do with Mick or John McVie ever since 1972. And this marked the end of the original Fleetwood Mac that had been since 1967. And Bob Welch and Christine McVie pretty much kind of became the leaders of this band, and they kind of took the creative control from Danny Kirwin once he left. Danny Kirwin was replaced by two people. He was replaced by vocalist Dave Walker and guitarist Bob Weston. Both of these individuals had a very short-lived time in Fleetwood Mac. Dave Walker was fired shortly after joining the band because his vocal style did not fit them at all, and he was let go. And Bob Weston was fired after he decided that it'd be a great idea to have an affair with Mick Fleetwood's wife.
A lot of drama in the early years of Fleetwood Mac.
Oh, you think this is drama? Wait till we get to the rumors era. It's only going to get more interesting from here. And, you know, when Mick Fleetwood, I remember reading, after he found out about this, he actually tolerated it for a while, until they actually went public in front of everybody else in the band about this. Then he decided he was done. Mick, I'm sorry, I don't understand what he was thinking.
I think at that point, you're thinking, I just want to keep the band together. We're having success with our different concerts now that we have, you know, the, quote, drama was out at the time with Danny Kirwin leaving, so maybe that's him just kind of saying, I'm putting this behind us. I'm trying to be better than this right now. We have a job to do, but I guess when it's your wife, emotions kind of take over just a little bit.
Exactly right. And basically, once it was really public and Mick knew about it, he was devastated. And he said, and they had a tour coming up for the U.S., and he goes, we can't go on this tour. We got too much problems going on. He goes, I got to fix my personal life. We just fired a guitar player and a vocalist we just got. We need a break to figure things out. But their manager, Clifford Davis, had other ideas. He didn't want to go along with that. And now we're going to get into a really interesting time in Fleetwood Mac's history called the fake Fleetwood Mac scandal. This is a really interesting part of their history, and it's a little bit confusing, so we're going to break this down a little bit to try and make it as clear to you, because it is to me, because when we were going through this, it was a little confusing to me. I had to keep thinking it over and over to try to understand how this went down. Basically, when Fleetwood Mac formed in 1967, they hired Davis as their manager, and when they signed the contract to him, they signed away their rights to the name Fleetwood Mac to him. And Davis claimed that he owned that band's name, and since he owned the name, it didn't matter if Fleetwood Mac wanted to go on tour. He'll just create his own Fleetwood Mac. And so what he did, he held auditions. He actually made phone calls to a bunch of people from a band called Legs and told them that, okay, you guys are the new Fleetwood Mac. Here's what's going down. Bob Welch and John McVie have quit. Mick and Christine are having some troubles, but they'll join us later. But you guys are going to be the new part of the new Fleetwood Mac. And Mick and Christine will come join you guys later. And and he passed them off as the real Fleetwood Mac. And this band called Legs actually was fed the same lie, and fans were told it too. And but thank God, Fleetwood Mac's road manager, John Courage, knew something was not right. And so... And when he found out that this was, a complete hoax, he had his team hide all of the real Fleetwood Mac's equipment on the road. And without the equipment, the fake band could not go on. And so their tour came to a screeching halt. It fell apart. It was over. But upon hearing about this fake band, Mick Fleetwood and John McVie quickly sued Davis over the rights to the band's name. But again, as mentioned previously, they had forfeited their rights when they signed the contract, so they no longer had rights to the name. And they went into a big legal battle with Davis, and this whole turmoil struggle with over their name, it went on for about a year, and it put a major setback for the band pretty much up throughout 1973. Because, and to make matters worse, Bob Welch had realized that because they had been living in the UK and they were not United States-based, Warner Brothers, which was the label they were under, had been neglecting them because they were not U.S.-based, and they basically didn't care about Fleetwood Mac or didn't even know. They had never really known who Fleetwood Mac actually was. They'd never seen the members of Fleetwood Mac, so they had no idea who was the real band, this fake one or the real Fleetwood Mac.
Talk about an identity crisis.
Oh dear Lord, yes, it was not. It was really, really bad. And so Bob Welch said, "You know what, guys? In order for us to prove we're the real Fleetwood Mac, in order to get this whole thing down, we have got to relocate to the United States. We have to move there." Because if we're going to, to avoid this kind of problem again, we're going to have to relocate to the U.S. so we can stay close to the record company in L.A. So the band relocated to Los Angeles in 1974, and they have been a U.S.-based band ever since.
And thank God they came to America, because otherwise we may not be sitting here talking about the band. We may be discussing a historical band that never really continued on. It could have just been done at that point had they not moved to the U.S.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Had this legal battle stayed the way it was, and no one knew who was the real Fleetwood Mac, the band could have broken up, and they never could have become the legendary band that they are. They even had a couple people speak on their behalf. Famous rock promoter Bill Graham, who has done so many artists, promoted many acts throughout the 60s and 70s. I mean, he's done like everybody, promoted them for shows and stuff, and got tours set up. He wrote a letter to Warner Brothers, and basically to give proof that, hey, I know the real Fleetwood Mac, this is them. And that didn't really help it either. Warner Brothers still didn't quite believe it. And ironically enough, that legal battle did not end for several years. And I tried to research exactly when it ended, and I could not find what exact year it ended. But regardless, the band had fought enough that they were able to record again under their own name. And of course, obviously, with Clifford Davis's stupid move by trying to get rid of Fleetwood Mac and create his own, he was fired. And so the band now became managed by themselves, and mostly under the direction of Mick Fleetwood. So he became the band's manager from that point forward. There were two more albums released with Bob Welch. 1973's "Mystery to Me" was released, which was still at the time had Bob Weston on it. That album did not do very well. In fact, it did really poorly. There's only one track that really stands out from that album called "Why," which has been really played beautifully when Buckingham Nicks joined the band in 1975. And in fact, there's several YouTube links to that song you can check out. Their version, I think, is even better than the original, but that's my personal opinion. And the last album that Bob Welch recorded with Fleetwood Mac was called, in 1974, "Heroes Are Hard to Find." And the album did achieve minor success, and in fact, it actually had been the most successful album that band had ever had at that time, up to this point, in the United States. It was not a mega hit, but it was the most successful album they had at the time. But by the end of 1974, Bob Welch had enough of the business of this fake Fleetwood Mac, all this trouble he had in this band. He was tired, and in December of 1974, he told Mick Fleetwood abruptly, "I'm out. I'm done." And Fleetwood Mac has like this curse where they're always having to replace a guitarist every couple of years. Once again, they had to replace their leader. But in an ironic, interesting twist of fate, Mick Fleetwood didn't have to go search very hard to find Bob Welch's replacement, because he had met another struggling guitarist just a few weeks prior. And we're actually going to tell you that story in our next podcast when we discuss the rumors era of the band. Before we close this podcast episode, we want to talk. We mentioned earlier in the beginning that Bob Welch's era of Fleetwood Mac has been considered to be known as the forgotten era of Fleetwood Mac. I think the biggest reason, and this is probably known across the board for all Fleetwood Mac fans and anybody who may know about the band, after Bob Welch left, when Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks joined the band and had a mega success with Rumors, that era overshadowed his. In fact, many people thought when they joined the band in 1975, they had thought that this Fleetwood Mac was a new band for those who didn't even know that they were a band prior to 1975. And that's probably the biggest reason why Bob Welch's era has been overshadowed. And, there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of trouble while he was in the band. But Bob Welch, after he left the band, he left on good terms with Fleetwood Mac. He really did. In fact, when they were recording Rumors in 1976, he actually came by the studio to hang out and jam with the band at the time. And as mentioned before, Christy McVie and Lindsey Buckingham sang backing vocals and arranged a new version of Sentimental Lady for him in 1976. And Bob Welch's career after leaving Fleetwood Mac, he had success with his album French Kiss, and he had some success for a while in the late 70s. His career started to go down in the 1980s, and he kind of started to disappear from the music scene. He didn't do much past the 1980s. It's a very sad shame what happened to Bob Welch, because unfortunately, he committed suicide in 2012, in June of 2012. What happened was he had actually had a back surgery that had to be done, and it went wrong, and it left him paralyzed. And he, after having this horrible thing happen to him, he became very depressed and basically didn't want to live anymore. And he, I think he died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and told his wife that, you know, in a suicide note, that she shouldn't have to care for an invalid. In fact, his wife was actually the subject of "Sentimental Lady" in 1972 when he wrote that song. It's a shame about Bob Welch because he's a really phenomenal guitarist, and he actually is, in my mind, and I think many fans would agree, he kept Fleetwood Mac together during this very middle-of-the-road period where they were not sure where they were going, where they could have stayed together or they could have broken up. You know, he fought hard to make sure that they kept the rights to the name, and it was his idea that they relocated to the United States, which was the smartest move they could have made at the time. And you know, it's a shame. While he left on good terms when he left the band, in fact, Mick Fleetwood also did manage his career up until the 1980s. There was a problem that happened in 1994. Bob Welch sued Mick Fleetwood and John McVie over rights to songwriting royalties that he was owed, and they did not pay him. And I believe he ended up getting paid those rights, but that really put a damper on their relationship. And when the band was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1998, he was left out of the induction.
You have to wonder if that lawsuit was one of the main reasons he was left out of that, and could have also contributed to his inevitable depression and suicide. So it is very unfortunate. You've heard Bob Welch's amazing guitar playing abilities in "Sentimental Lady" and "Bare Trees," and it is a real shame that he had the main ideas to really bring this band some pretty great success in the United States, and maybe he didn't feel that he was credited enough or given the proper light, as I guess you could say, with this version of Fleetwood Mac.
Right. I think there's a Rolling Stones article a couple of years back that actually mentioned why people should listen to Bob Welch's era of Fleetwood Mac. And the Rumors era and the Peter Green era has all their albums they created during those days have been remastered multiple times and have had all these bonus tracks thrown into it and had these big remastering re-releases. Bob Welch's albums have only been re-released one time and remastered once, and they don't get the attention as much as the Rumors era and the Peter Green era does. As far as him being left out of the Rock Hall induction, the only eras that were inducted were the Peter Green era and the Rumors era lineup. I'm not sure if that was a decision made by Fleetwood Mac to leave him out of it, or just the Rock Hall, because the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame tends to, their induction of bands, people know that they're not the best when it comes to inducting bands that qualify as rock and roll, but that's a whole different subject. But anyway, so I don't know if Fleetwood Mac had insisted that he not be inducted, or it was the Rock Hall's decision, but either way, it's a shame, and he should have been inducted into the Rock Hall. You know, his era deserves a lot more attention than it gets.
And we hope that we've given that attention in this second episode of our podcast, and that is actually going to wrap things up for episode 2 of The Chain, the evolution of Fleetwood Mac. Thanks for listening, and keep a lookout for episode 3, where we will discuss the band's runaway success, the story behind Rumors, and the legendary Tusk album. For Jeff Coast, I'm Sean Stewart, and we'll see you next time on The Chain, the evolution of Fleetwood Mac.